Okay team, it's time to start assembling all of the extruder parts and the auto leveling sensor. So what you're going to need for this part of the project is you're going to need your Y carriage assembly, which should be looking quite marvellous by now. You're going to need the hot end. You're going to need the 12 volt fan. You're going to need your auto leveling sensor, which comes with 2 washers and 2 large nuts. You're not going to need the extension yet, and put that aside into the parts box. And you're going to need your extruder parts bag, so get that guy opened up and into your parts box. And you're going to need your last stepper motor, so go ahead and get that cable unfurled and straightened out. So putting the hot end and the fan aside, it's time to start with this auto leveling sensor. So take all the bolts off so it's like this, and then in the small hole on this side it will drop in nicely, but we don't want to drop it all the way through yet. First thing we want to do is put a big nut in there and then wind the nut onto this sensor. Might help to do it upside down so gravity helps, is in your favour. Just wind it down a fair way. It only needs to be far enough so the sensor goes up, and before it gets too far, add your top washer, then send it through and keep winding. This probe's going to go a long way down. You want to keep winding till you can hold the probe, till the tip of the probe is just below the wooden base. So you see that, how my probe tip is just, it's about, the entire orange bit's just over this edge. That's about where we want it. Hold it in place, we put on our second huge washer and just run our second nut all the way down. Now because we're going to adjust it, it doesn't need to be super tight. Rotate it here so that the wire exits from as far forward as possible. That'll help when we bend this wire, and then tighten up both nuts by hand. We're going to adjust this later on, so there's no need to be an Iron Man and tighten them up permanently. And the last thing we have to do is take this cable and gently coax it into this tiny little groove at the bottom here. So wiggle it, it should sit in there nicely. You can see it's all bends back. Try not to bend this too much. If the bend's too tight, you risk breaking the wires. Now we'll put this guy aside, and then we'll move on to the extruder. So take the idler arm here, which is the big, nice L-shaped piece. And with that, we're going to need the long bolt, the matching nut, and the spring. So this way is you put the bolt through the far end, then on the bottom side we put the spring on, followed by this big nut, and just wind the nut down until it touches the spring. It can be quite difficult to get started. Touches the spring, job done. Next step is to grab the bearing, the 65 bearing and the bolt that goes with it, and then with the arm in this direction, place the bearing in, and then from the front slide the bolt through. Now the bolt will wind in, and you'll need a Phillips head screwdriver to finish the job. Now, it doesn't have to be tight at all. It's far less than a quarter of a turn, maybe an 1/8 or a 1/16 of a turn. Just so that this bolt can't be undone by hand and the bearing still spins nice and freely. So that's our idler assembly. All we have to do now is behind it, slide in this little Derrilin bush. Comes in from behind, and that's our assembly. Now, if you take your stepper motor with the wires exiting to the bottom this time, we can place this mechanism on top like so. Then we need to add an M3 by 20 bolt with the washer underneath it. And line all this up, then do your bolt up into that top corner hole of the stepper motor. And then use your Allen key to secure it in place. So the bolt should be tight, not loose, and the arm should move nice and freely like that. So this arm is going to be used to force the plastic filament against our toothed gear, which is this guy. So this is the next thing we have to install. So slide this guy on, making sure that this groove here lines up with the bearing. So to do that, you're going to have to make sure that the grub screw is towards the top. Rotate the stepper so the flat side is facing down on this side, so this is the flat side, and slide this guy on. Now you're going to need to slide it so that it is sitting right in the middle of the bearing. The easiest way to do that is to set this about the height you want and then hold some pressure using your finger against the idler. This will force the idler to push the bearing into this groove and hold it in place. Once it's there, we need to carefully put it down because our old friend super glue has to come back to the party. So take the grub screw out, add a tiny drop of super glue, and wind it back in the hole, just a little bit, just get it started. Once it's started, slide this gear on. Use the idler to hold it in position, and then continue winding until that grub screw bites down on the flat surface. Job done. Now your stepper motor is ready to be mounted onto your YZ carriage. Clean up spanners, put the super glue away so it doesn't cause any more issues, and then pull this guy out. Okay, grabbing the base of the extruder, which is the piece that's going to mount here, and 3 M3 by 10 bolts, which are the short ones in the extruder pack. We're going to mount the base right on here on the end of the Y carriage. So go ahead and do that. It's a good idea to start the front screw first because it's the easiest to get to. But you're going to have to remove the fan mount bolts. So take out these 2 M3 by 16s that hold the fan on. Which will allow you to put the M3 by 10s into the extruder base. Be careful that the nuts don't drop out of the fan mount. If they do, be ready to catch them and put them back. Again, tighten these up. Good quarter turn past tight. And then put these 2 M3 by 16s that hold the fan mount back in. it's got our extruder base mounted nicely. Now it's time to attach the fan. So grab the fan, there's the side of the information this side and the dark side, and you're going to need 2 M3x16 bolts and 2 nuts. So put the bolts in the dark side on the same edge as the wire's exit, and then carefully attach 2 nuts so that, 2 nuts so that they adjust on no more than just connected. And then simply slide these 2 bolts into their respective holes on the mount. Once it's in position, hold them in using your fingers on either side and wind the bolts in. So at the moment the bolts are a tiny bit too long, but that'll be fixed once you print yourself a fan guide, which is probably it's going to be one of the first things you print. Now it's time to insert your hot end. So take the hot end, make sure that the wires exit towards the top side to the left side of your printer, and insert the hot end. You'll know if the hot end's in far enough because if you put an M3x20 bolt in here, it'll stop the hot end coming out. If the hot end comes out, you'll have to remove the bolt and push the hot end in further. Additionally, you should be able to see the hot end touching the plastic at the top here. Once it's that high, put this bolt in so that it can't fall out, which is one of your 2 M3x20s. Then grab another M3x20, put it in this hole, and we're going to take your extruder motor and we're going to hold it on the back side here. You'll notice that this sprung bolt goes down that hole there. And all being well, those 2 M3x20s will line up with your stepper motor. You can then use an Allen key on this one to connect it. And once it's started, start the one on the other side. Once they're both well started, then finish tightening them the same way we tighten everything. Until it's tight, and a tiny bit extra. The hot end should not wiggle at all. It should feel pretty solid. If it does wiggle, you'll need to tighten this one a little more. And that is your extruder completed. The only thing left to do on this end up here is the wiring, and that's in our next step.